The cold November air cut through Gallipolis, Ohio, where a solemn crowd had gathered under a cloudy sky. Jack Ryan stood next to the flag-draped casket, clutching a worn military cap that had belonged to Mike Howard, his best friend and brother in arms. Around him, other veterans stood in respectful silence, their eyes fixed on the coffin, each lost in memories that traced back to times of battle and sacrifice. For Jack, this funeral wasn't just a farewell. It was a renewal of a silent vow to honor Mike's memory, a man who had risked his life countless times for his brothers, even pulling Jack from the jaws of death in Afghanistan. He could still see it vividly: the chaos, the explosions, the sting of burnt sand and fear. The ceremony was wrapped in a heavy sadness, a palpable grief that seemed to press down on everyone present. Among fellow veterans and family members, Jack felt the weight of promises left unfulfilled. He closed his eyes briefly, breathing in the memories, the laughter, the conversations about a future that would never come. When he finally stepped forward to say his goodbye, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I promise you, brother," Jack murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "I won't let anyone forget what you did for me. For all of us." He clenched his fists, swallowing the pain that seemed to tear through his insides. Yet, just as he began to turn away from the grave, the deafening roar of motorcycle engines shattered the reverent silence. Heads turned toward the commotion at the cemetery gates, where a group of leather-clad bikers stormed in, sneering and shouting, "The hell's bastards!" Among them, Razor, their leader, sat on a black Harley, a smirk on his scarred face that betrayed his utter disrespect for the gathering. Jack's jaw tightened as Razor swaggered over, scanning the crowd with disdain. With a mocking tone, Razor called out, "Well, well, not every day you see so-called heroes laying in the ground, huh?" He chuckled, nodding toward Mike's casket with a sick grin. "What did this guy do, anyway? Fall asleep on the job?" The taunt sent a ripple through the veterans. Jack's vision blurred, his hands trembling with restrained fury. Razor's sneer only grew bolder. "Yeah, that's right, tough guy. What's the matter?" "Nothing to say now," he sneered, locking eyes with Jack. The veterans around him placed cautious hands on Jack's shoulder, silently pleading for restraint. But Jack could feel his control slipping. With a sudden surge of anger, Jack broke free from the veteran's grip and marched toward Razor, his steps deliberate and steady. "Say that again," Jack demanded, his voice low and deadly. Razor's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered, puffing out his chest. "I said, your friend here wasn't that special. Guess he wasn't tough enough, huh?" Razor taunted, laughing. But before he could finish, Jack's fist connected with his face in a blur of motion, sending Razor stumbling back, his laughter silenced by the force of the blow. The scene erupted as Razor's gang surged forward, but the veterans quickly moved in to restrain Jack. Amid the chaos, Razor picked himself up, wiping blood from his lip, his face twisted in fury. He spat on the ground, glaring at Jack with cold, hateful eyes. "This isn't over, hero," he hissed. "I'll show you just how far I'll go to make you pay." With a final glare, Razor turned to his gang, gesturing for them to back off. The Hell's Bastards revved their engines, sending a storm of noise through the cemetery before roaring away, leaving a tense, shaken silence in their wake. The veterans slowly released Jack, their expressions filled with a mixture of concern and understanding. Jack returned to the ceremony, but his heart felt heavy, weighed down not only by grief but now by a new, simmering rage. He tried to focus, to honor Mike's memory in peace, but Razor's words clung to him like a dark shadow. As he stood by the casket one last time, Jack clenched his jaw, a vow forming in his mind that he wouldn't let Razor's insult go unanswered. Once the service concluded, Jack shook hands with old friends, his face marked with lines of sorrow and tension. But as he walked away from the cemetery, he realized that peace had been shattered, that an old buried fury had been awakened within him, a fury he would struggle to contain. The next morning, Jack opened his front door to find his truck in ruins. Its doors were dented, the windows shattered, and slashed tires left the vehicle slumped on the gravel driveway like a wounded animal. Across the hood, in a thick dripping spray of red paint, was a single phrase, "You messed with the devil." Jack's hands curled into fists as he read the message, fury pounding in his temples. He had known Razor wouldn't let the incident at the cemetery slide, but the audacity of this attack only stoked a fire inside him that he had long tried to extinguish. As he stood there, glaring at the wreckage, his mind raced with questions he could no longer suppress. Is this what it means to come home from war? Will I always be at war, even here? Jack took a deep breath, closing his eyes briefly as he forced himself to regain control. When he opened them, the determination was set. This attack wouldn't go unanswered. Razor had made it personal. And Jack, bound by honor, knew he couldn't let this slide. Later that day, he found himself standing across from Charlie Grayson, the local police chief and a longtime friend from his younger days in Gallipolis. Charlie's face was tight with worry as he scanned the photos Jack had taken of his truck. Shaking his head, he looked back up at Jack, his voice low and cautious. "Jack, these guys don't play by any rules. You need to be careful, real careful, before jumping into a fight with them." Jack leaned forward, his tone sharpened by frustration. "So what are you saying, Charlie? Just let them run wild? They're out there terrorizing everyone without consequence. I can't just sit by and do nothing." Charlie sighed, scratching the back of his neck as he shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, they're not like the gangs you've seen before. The Hell's Bastards will destroy anything and anyone in their way. Families, friends, anyone who's close to you becomes a target." He paused, his gaze intense, before adding, "Think about your own safety, Jack. And think about who else might get hurt in the crossfire." The warning hung heavily in the air. Jack stared back, frustration etched into his face, the silence between them thick with unspoken tension. "Can I count on the police if things escalate?" Jack asked, his voice a careful measure between plea and demand. Charlie's hesitation was almost imperceptible, but Jack caught it, and his stomach twisted with disappointment. After a long pause, Charlie finally spoke, his voice filled with a mix of reluctance and helplessness. "Look, Jack, I'll do what I can, but there's only so much we can do. These guys have resources, connections. They've taken down good people before." Charlie met Jack's gaze, his face lined with worry. "Just be smart about this." Jack felt the weight of his friend's caution but refused to let it deter him. With a final nod, he left the station, his resolve stronger than ever. If he couldn't rely on the law, he'd have to find his own way. This fight had become about more than just his pride. It was a matter of honor and of justice for a town that had been terrorized far too long. That evening, Jack walked the familiar streets of Gallipolis, stopping to speak with people who had experienced the gang's cruelty firsthand. At the local diner, he met a middle-aged man whose eyes were hollow, grief etched deep into his worn face. Over a cup of coffee, the man shared his story, his voice trembling as he recounted how his son had gotten involved with drugs distributed by the Hell's Bastards. "He was a good kid," the man whispered, gripping his cup tightly, as if it were the only thing grounding him to reality. "But those bastards, they got him hooked and they kept him close, using him until he had nothing left." Jack listened intently, his resolve deepening with every word. From there, he spoke to a shop owner whose store had been vandalized repeatedly for refusing to pay protection fees, and a young woman who had lost her brother in a senseless bar brawl instigated by gang members. Each story stoked the fire inside Jack, solidifying his determination to take a stand. These people deserved justice, and if no one else would bring it, he would. As night fell, Jack retreated to his home, locking the door behind him with a sense of purpose. The phone felt heavy in his hand as he dialed a familiar number, one he hadn't used in years. When a gruff voice answered on the other end, Jack's words were brief and unwavering. "I need help, and I need more than words," he said, his voice steeled by a determination that bordered on desperation. A pause hung over the line, and then the voice on the other end simply replied, "I'll see what I can do." After the call, Jack sat in silence for a long moment, the night settling heavily around him. He was fully aware that reaching out to his old military contacts meant crossing a line he'd hoped to leave behind. But there was no room for hesitation now. His mind was clear, his purpose renewed. Razor and his gang would soon learn that their reign of terror was coming to an end. As he drifted into a restless sleep, Jack's thoughts lingered on the faces he had spoken to that day. Their grief, their helplessness, the quiet despair that permeated the town he had once called home. He knew that he was venturing into dangerous territory, but a life of service had taught him that true peace was only achieved through struggle. And if he had to resurrect the soldier within himself to protect what was right, then so be it. Tomorrow, the fight would begin. And Jack Ryan was ready. Days later, under the dim light of dawn, Jack Ryan positioned his truck at the side of a deserted stretch of road just outside town. He had carefully chosen this spot, a sharp bend on an empty highway, flanked by tall trees and hidden from the casual passerby. With a deep breath, he scanned the surroundings one last time, his military instincts kicking in as he rehearsed his plan mentally. His muscles tensed as he waited, heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and resolve. He knew Razor's gang would pass through this route on their way to a rumored meeting, and he planned to intercept them here, alone. Then, as the morning silence settled around him, the distant rumble of engines reached his ears, steadily growing louder. Jack's fingers tightened around the wheel. The sound of motorcycles, once so common, now triggered a sense of dread mixed with anticipation. The gang came into view, their figures looming through the fog, bikes roaring as they sped down the road. Leading the pack was Razor, his expression unreadable beneath a pair of dark glasses. Jack took one last steadying breath before he swung the truck across the road, blocking their path. The screech of brakes echoed as the bikers skidded to a halt, Razor glaring at Jack with an expression of cold, calculated fury. Razor dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate, and shot Jack a predatory smile. "Look who wants to play soldier," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. The gang members circled the truck like wolves, eyeing Jack with sneers and taunts, their hostility tangible in the morning air. Jack stepped out of the truck, unarmed but resolute, facing down the group with an intensity honed by years of combat. Razor laughed, a hollow sound echoing against the trees. "What's the matter, hero? You forgot your gun." One of the bikers suddenly lunged at Jack with a steel pipe, but Jack sidestepped, his training kicking in. In a flash, he delivered a precise punch to the man's jaw, sending him sprawling. Another came at him from behind, and Jack spun, driving his elbow into the biker's ribs with practiced force. Pain flared as he took a hit to his own shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward, his movements swift and efficient. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Razor taunted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The real heroes are dead, Jack. You should have stayed in the ground with them." The words hit Jack like a blow, and for a split second, his focus wavered, memories of fallen comrades flashing through his mind. But he steadied himself, breathing through the surge of emotion, forcing himself to stay present. The fight turned brutal quickly. Jack's military precision allowed him to land blows with lethal accuracy, breaking the nose of one attacker, sending another crashing to the ground with a well-placed kick. But the gang was relentless, their hits landing hard, leaving bruises and cuts across Jack's body. Blood dripped from a gash on his cheek, his muscles aching under the strain, yet he fought on, his will unbreakable. Just as he ducked to avoid a chain swinging towards him, Jack's eyes fell on something poking out of a gang member's jacket pocket, a folded letter. He managed to knock the man down, snatching the letter from his pocket before the biker hit the ground. With a quick glance, Jack saw it was a note bearing Razor's signature, and scribbled in block letters with a date, time, and location of an upcoming meeting of the Hell's Bastards. The discovery lit a spark in Jack. Now, he had a direct lead on their next gathering. Razor noticed the shift in Jack's focus and, sneering, threw himself at him. They grappled in a deadly dance of punches and kicks, each seeking dominance. At one point, Razor knocked Jack to his knees, laughing as he circled him, like a vulture waiting to swoop in for the kill. You're pathetic, Jack. This town doesn't want you. Your friend didn't even make it out alive. Why are you fighting? Razor's words dripped with venom, intended to pierce Jack's resolve. But Jack's eyes flared with renewed intensity as he stood up, breathing hard. Because, Jack replied, his voice raw with conviction, some promises are worth fighting for. He lunged at Razor, landing a fierce blow that staggered him. As Razor stumbled, he saw something different in Jack's gaze, an unyielding strength that came not from anger, but from a deeper, unbreakable resolve. Knowing he was outmatched, Razor barked an order to his remaining men, and they quickly retreated, dragging their injured comrades with them. Razor shot Jack one last look of seething hatred, his promise of revenge evident even in his retreat. "This isn't over, Ryan," he spat, before mounting his bike and roaring away, leaving Jack alone on the empty road. As the dust settled, Jack stood amidst the aftermath, breathing heavily, blood and sweat staining his skin. He glanced down at the letter in his hand, feeling a surge of satisfaction at finally having something tangible to go on. His body ached from the onslaught, but the pain was secondary to the purpose that now drove him. Returning home that evening, Jack cleaned his wounds in silence, reflecting on the fight and the memories Razor's words had stirred. In his dimly lit kitchen, he poured a glass of water, his gaze falling on a framed photo of his unit, their faces alive and laughing, a stark contrast to the losses he now carried. Quietly, he murmured, "I promised all of you I'd never let this slide." With his injuries bandaged and the letter carefully stored, Jack finally sat down, exhaustion creeping over him. Yet he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was no longer just about Razor or a petty grudge. It was about honoring the fallen, protecting the town, and finding justice in a way that only someone with his skills could. Tomorrow, he would use the information he'd obtained to plan his next move. For now, he let the quiet of his home wash over him, bracing himself for the battles that lay ahead. As dusk settled over Gallipolis, a hesitant knock sounded on Jack's door. Jack, still sore from the ambush, opened it cautiously, his guard instantly up. Standing before him was a young woman with sharp, wary eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her coat. She glanced over her shoulder nervously before meeting Jack's gaze. "My name is Ellie," she began, her voice low, almost as if she feared someone might overhear. I think we both want the same thing. I need your help." Jack studied her, trying to place her face among the familiar faces of Gallipolis, but she didn't look like one of the locals. Her eyes held an edge of defiance tempered by fear. "You're one of them," Jack said, suspicion evident in his voice. Ellie hesitated before nodding, her voice barely a whisper. "My brother's part of the Hell's bastards, and I'm sick of what they've turned him into." A silence filled the room as Jack took in her words, letting his defenses ease slightly. He knew what it was like to lose someone to forces beyond control. "Why come to me?" Jack asked, his tone softened but still guarded. Ellie took a deep breath, her voice filled with barely contained anger and desperation. "Because I want to get him out. Mad Dog. He's poisoned his mind, made him believe there's no way out of the gang. I need to get my brother back, but I can't do it alone. I heard what you did to Razor and the others. If anyone can take them down, it's you." Jack's face remained unreadable as he considered her words. "You know this could put you and your brother in serious danger," he warned. "Mad Dog doesn't take betrayal lightly." Ellie's expression hardened. "I know the risks," she replied, her voice shaking with determination. "But I've been watching him destroy people, my brother included, for too long. I can't just stand by and watch anymore. I have to do something." Her bravery struck a chord in Jack. He could see that her loyalty to her brother had outweighed her fear. He nodded slowly, motioning her to sit. "All right," he said, voice steady. "Tell me everything you know." They talked for hours as Ellie detailed Mad Dog's operations and the gang's structure, explaining how he controlled the members through fear, manipulation, and loyalty games. Her words painted a chilling picture of a man who ruled with cruelty, each story stoking Jack's resolve. She described the gang's routines, hideouts, and weak spots, but Jack noticed a struggle within her, caught between loyalty to her brother and the danger of crossing the gang. Sensing her conflict, Jack softened his tone, offering reassurance. "Sometimes we have to fight for the people we love, even if they don't want to be saved," he said quietly, his voice steady. "Your brother might not understand now, but you're doing what's best for him." Ellie's face softened, relief evident in her eyes. "I hope so," she whispered, her voice heavy with doubt and hope. Mad Dog's convinced him he has no family outside the gang. "It's like he's brainwashed." Jack nodded, understanding the depth of the gang's hold on her brother. Mad Dog's not the first to manipulate like that. But everyone has a breaking point. As they sat there, the bond between them grew, an unspoken trust forming as they exchanged stories of loss, fear, and resilience. For the first time, Jack spoke about his own struggles, about the guilt he carried for those he couldn't save, for comrades who didn't make it home. "I've seen people at their worst," he said, his eyes clouded with memories. "But I've also seen them fight to be better. You're doing that for your brother now." His words seemed to resonate with Ellie, and her own resolve strengthened. She finally shared the last, crucial piece of information: the location and time of a meeting where Mad Dog was expected to gather with his lieutenants. "It's happening tomorrow night," Ellie whispered, her voice thick with apprehension. "He'll have his most trusted men there. If we can hit them when they're not expecting it." Jack listened carefully, his mind already calculating the possibilities. "It's risky, but it could work," he replied, a spark of determination lighting his gaze. "With the right timing, we can take them by surprise and cripple his operation." Ellie glanced at Jack, her expression a mix of fear and hope. "But if things go wrong," her voice trailed off, the weight of their plan settling between them. Jack met her gaze, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "We'll be prepared. No one's asking you to put yourself in more danger than you already have. You've done enough." But Ellie shook her head, her jaw set in determination. "I'm not backing down now. This is my fight too. If I want to get my brother back, I have to see it through." Jack couldn't help but admire her courage, knowing the weight of the choice she'd made. "All right," he said, nodding. "We'll take on Mad Dog together. But remember, we move carefully, and we watch each other's backs. This isn't just a fight, it's survival." As the night deepened, they finalized their plan, discussing every detail until they both felt ready. Just before she left, Ellie turned to Jack, a mix of gratitude and newfound confidence in her eyes. "Thank you, Jack. I didn't think anyone would care enough to help." Jack's voice was firm, yet kind. "Justice doesn't care about family ties. And no one deserves to live in fear of the people who claim to protect them." Ellie left his home under the cover of darkness, each step leading her closer to the dangerous path she'd committed to. As Jack watched her disappear into the night, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He'd joined the fight for reasons of his own, but now he was fighting for something larger. For Ellie's family, for his fallen brothers, and for a town that deserved peace. Tomorrow night, they would step into the lion's den. And Jack knew that whatever happened, they would be ready to face it together. The air was thick with tension as Jack and Ellie crouched in the shadows of the abandoned warehouse where Mad Dog's gang was set to gather. The place reeked of gasoline and stale beer, and every noise echoed ominously through the empty halls. Jack signaled to Ellie, who clutched a wrench she'd found, her face a determined mask despite the nervous glint in her eyes. They had prepared as best as they could. Jack had armed himself with a simple, rugged hunting knife and a makeshift baton fashioned from a metal pipe he'd scavenged. This wasn't a fair fight, and he knew it, but he was determined to make every hit count. He glanced at Ellie, who gave him a slight nod. They were in this together, and now there was no turning back. Soon, the low rumble of engines filled the air, growing louder as the gang's motorcycles roared into the gravel lot. Mad Dog was the first to dismount, his tall, imposing frame casting a long shadow as he surveyed the area, his eyes scanning for threats. Razor followed, along with a dozen more Hell's Bastards, each of them armed and wearing a fierce scowl. They laughed and joked among themselves, oblivious to the ambush lying in wait. Jack waited until they were well inside the building before he and Ellie moved. Quietly, they positioned themselves behind a stack of old crates, listening as the gang began to talk in loud voices, their tone arrogant and full of bravado. Jack's fingers tightened around the pipe, every sense on high alert. Finally, Mad Dog raised his hand, signaling silence as he began to speak. "All right, listen up." Mad Dog's voice was cold, commanding, dripping with authority. "That punk Ryan thinks he can mess with us. We're gonna show him what happens when you cross the Hell's Bastards. No mercy. No exceptions." The words sent a shiver down Jack's spine, but they also steeled his resolve. He motioned to Ellie, and together they crept closer, moving as silently as shadows. Jack could feel the tension in Ellie's breathing, the tremor in her hand, but her face showed nothing but focus. She was ready. In one swift motion, Jack threw a metal pipe across the floor, creating a loud clang that echoed through the warehouse. The gang members spun around, momentarily disoriented, giving Jack and Ellie the opening they needed. Jack leapt from his hiding spot, charging forward and slamming his pipe into the back of the nearest gang member, who crumpled to the floor with a grunt. Chaos erupted. The Hell's Bastards shouted in confusion, their voices blending into a cacophony of curses and orders. Ellie joined the fray, her wrench swinging with surprising strength as she struck at anyone who came too close. Together, they fought fiercely, using the shadows and the maze of crates to their advantage. One of the bikers lunged at Ellie with a knife, and Jack intercepted him, driving his elbow into the man's face, disarming him with a swift twist of the wrist. Ellie followed up with a brutal swing of her wrench, her face a mixture of terror and determination as she took down her assailant. Jack gave her a nod of approval, a silent acknowledgement of her strength. But as they fought, the odds became clear. The gang was larger, and despite Jack and Ellie's determination, they were quickly getting surrounded. Razor, bleeding from a cut above his eye, spotted Jack and charged at him with a crowbar, a feral grin on his face. Jack blocked the blow, the impact reverberating up his arm, and retaliated with a quick jab to Razor's stomach. Razor staggered back but recovered quickly, his face twisted in rage. "You think you're a hero, Ryan?" Razor spat, swinging the crowbar again. "You're just a washed-up soldier, fighting battles that don't matter." The word stung, but Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he used Razor's own momentum against him, sidestepping and slamming the pipe down onto his back. Razor fell to his knees, gasping in pain, but before Jack could finish him off, Mad Dog's voice boomed across the warehouse. "Enough!" The gang members froze, creating a tense stillness. Mad Dog stood in the center of the warehouse, his gaze locked onto Jack, a smug smirk on his face. "You think you're some kind of avenger, don't you?" he sneered. "But you're just one man. And I'm going to make sure you and everyone you care about suffers." The words hung in the air, a deadly promise that sent a chill through Jack. But before he could respond, Ellie stepped forward, her voice trembling but defiant. "You don't control people through fear, Mad Dog. Not anymore." Mad Dog's eyes narrowed as he recognized her, his smirk widening into a cruel grin. "Ah, little Ellie. Betraying your own blood for this lost cause? Your brother would be ashamed." Ellie's face tightened, but she stood her ground, lifting her chin. "My brother deserves better than you. They all do." Her courage was like a spark, igniting something fierce in Jack. He raised his pipe, meeting Mad Dog's gaze with unyielding determination. "You're right, Mad Dog," Jack said, his voice steady. "I am just one man. But sometimes, that's all it takes." With that, the fight resumed, fiercer than before. Jack and Ellie fought side by side, their movements synchronized as they took on the gang's relentless onslaught. In a moment of danger, Jack shielded Ellie from a brutal swing, taking a painful blow to his side but refusing to falter. Ellie responded by fending off their attacker, her wrench connecting with a sickening thud. As the dust began to settle, Razor, bruised and battered, sneered at Jack, blood dripping from his lip. "You two think you've won," he taunted. "Mad Dog's got plans. You're already dead." The words hit hard, adding urgency to their mission. Jack and Ellie exchanged a look, both understanding that this battle was far from over. As the remaining bikers retreated, Razor's threat lingered in the air, a dark omen of the final confrontation that awaited them. They left the warehouse battered and bruised, but alive. On the walk back, Jack turned to Ellie, his voice softened by exhaustion. "You did good in there. Not everyone can stand up to people like that." Ellie managed a small, tired smile. "I never thought I'd find someone willing to believe in me like this. To actually help." Jack's gaze was steady as he replied, "We're in this together, until the end." And with that promise hanging between them, they prepared for the showdown to come, each step bringing them closer to the fight of their lives. The abandoned factory loomed against the midnight sky, its rusted walls and broken windows casting eerie shadows across the empty lot. Jack and Ellie moved quickly, setting up makeshift traps with the precision Jack had honed in his military days. The air was thick with tension and the heavy scent of gasoline, every sound magnified by the silence. The final showdown with Mad Dog and the Hell's Bastards was imminent. As they finished setting the last trap, Jack looked at Ellie, her face steely but anxious. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice a steady anchor against the storm of fear. Ellie nodded, her eyes fierce. "This ends tonight." Minutes later, the roar of motorcycles shattered the silence as Mad Dog and his gang arrived, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Mad Dog dismounted first, his face a twisted mask of anger and amusement, and gestured for his men to spread out. He called out, his voice echoing off the factory walls. "Ryan, you think you can take us down? Come out and face me, like a man." Jack stepped out from the shadows, his stance defiant, his gaze unwavering. "I'm right here, Mad Dog," he said, his voice carrying across the open space. "This ends now." Mad Dog sneered, his lips curling into a mocking grin. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a dead man walking." With a snap of his fingers, two of his men dragged out a group of hostages, townspeople Jack recognized, their faces pale with fear, hands bound. Mad Dog had upped the stakes, knowing Jack's code wouldn't let him walk away. The sight hit Jack hard, but he didn't falter. He met Mad Dog's gaze with cold resolve. "You don't scare me, and you don't control these people anymore." Mad Dog laughed, a low, sinister sound. "I control everything, Ryan. This town, these people, and soon I'll control you." With a yell, Jack lunged, the factory erupting into chaos as the traps he and Ellie had set sprang into action. Hidden tripwires triggered barrels to topple, blocking paths and scattering Mad Dog's men. Ellie, hiding in the shadows, used the commotion to slip toward the hostages, quickly cutting their bindings. Jack and Mad Dog clashed in a brutal hand-to-hand fight, their movements swift and lethal. Mad Dog was stronger than Jack had anticipated, each punch landing with a force that threatened to break bones. But Jack's military training gave him an edge, his precision and technique countering Mad Dog's brute strength. The fight was raw, every hit fueled by years of resentment and pain. "You've lost, Ryan," Mad Dog growled as he slammed Jack against a steel beam, his voice dripping with malice. "You can't win this. I was born in chaos. You're just a fool fighting for a broken world." Jack gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand, every muscle screaming in pain. "Maybe," he panted, "but even fools know when it's time to fight back." With a surge of strength, Jack twisted free, delivering a hard blow to Mad Dog's jaw, staggering him. Meanwhile, Ellie fought with fierce determination, fending off gang members trying to reach Jack. In a crucial moment, she saw Razor sneaking up on Jack with a knife, and without hesitation, she threw herself into the path, intercepting Razor and tackling him to the ground. The two struggled, Ellie's face a mix of fear and determination as she wrestled the knife from his hand and landed a fierce punch that left Razor momentarily stunned. Jack and Mad Dog's fight had reached a fever pitch. As Mad Dog lunged at him with a metal pipe, Jack sidestepped, grabbing Mad Dog's arm and twisting it with enough force to drop the weapon. With a swift kick, Jack sent Mad Dog stumbling backward, his rage faltering as he realized his control was slipping. At that moment, Ellie appeared beside Jack, her eyes blazing. They stood side by side, facing Mad Dog, who looked at them with a twisted mix of hatred and disbelief. "This is over, Mad Dog," Jack said, his voice firm. "You're done." Mad Dog laughed one last time, a hollow, defeated sound. "You don't get it, do you? I'll never stop. People like me don't just disappear." Jack took a deep breath, his resolve unshakable. "Maybe not. But you're done here." He looked at Ellie, and together they bound Mad Dog, leaving him incapacitated. Sirens wailed in the distance, the police finally arriving, summoned by a call Ellie had made just before the fight. Jack handed Mad Dog over, meeting the police chief's astonished gaze. "He's all yours." As the police led Mad Dog and his gang away, Jack and Ellie stood in the aftermath, bruised and exhausted but victorious. The hostages, now safe, thanked them quietly before leaving, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. Ellie looked at Jack, a small smile tugging at her lips despite the exhaustion. "We did it," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "It's finally over." Jack nodded, a sense of peace washing over him. "You were incredible in there. I couldn't have done this without you." Ellie's eyes softened, her gratitude unspoken but clear. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." They stood in silence, letting the weight of the night settle. The town was free, and Mad Dog's reign of terror had ended. As dawn broke, they walked together back into Gallipolis, each step lighter than the last, knowing they had finally given the town a chance at peace.